You are being tested every single day, and you keep failing the same test. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you honk aggressively. Your boss makes an unreasonable demand, and you react with visible frustration. A family member pushes your buttons, and you snap back with heated words. A colleague takes credit for your work, and you immediately confront them in front of others. Every reaction is a small defeat. Every emotional outburst a surrender of your power to someone else's agenda. Picture yourself in yesterday's most frustrating moment, feeling that familiar surge of anger or defensiveness, and recognize that in that instant, you hand and control your emotional state to another person. My calm is my fortress. The reason you continue to lose these daily battles is simple. You were trained from childhood to believe that authentic expression of emotion equals honesty, that immediate response equals engagement, that showing your feelings proves your humanity. This conditioning has made you predictable, manipulable, and ultimately weak in every negotiation that matters. When you react instantly to provocation, you reveal your pressure points to anyone watching. When you wear your emotions on your sleeve, you broadcast exactly which buttons others need to push to control your behavior. When you prioritize being liked over being respected, you signal that your boundaries are negotiable and your decisions can be influenced through emotional manipulation. The cost of this reactive existence compounds daily. Your co-workers learn that raising their voice gets you to back down. Your family discovers that guilt trips change your mind about important decisions. Salespeople realize that time pressure makes you buy things you do not need. Internet strangers figure out that certain topics make you type angry paragraphs that you will regret. Every reaction teaches the world how to handle you, how to bypass your rational mind, and trigger your emotional reflexes. You become a stimulus response machine, as predictable as a vending machine that dispenses outrage when fed the right coins. This is where Niccolo Machiavelli becomes your teacher, not because he advocated cruelty, but because he understood that effective leadership requires emotional discipline and strategic thinking over reactive impulses. In Chapter 17 of The Prince, Machiavelli writes about the choice between being loved and being feared, concluding that while both are ideal, fear is more reliable than love because it depends on you rather than on the whims of others. Fear, in modern terms, is simply respect backed by the knowledge that you cannot be easily moved, manipulated, or provoked into poor decisions. When people know that you do not react predictably to pressure, they treat you differently. When they understand that your decisions come from strategy rather than emotion, they respect your boundaries. The foundation of ruthless calm begins with understanding that your emotional reactions are not sacred expressions of your authentic self. They are simply habits that can be changed. Every time someone says something that would normally make you angry, you have a choice point that lasts approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, you can choose the reactive path that feels satisfying in the moment but costs you respect and strategic position, or you can choose a response that serves your longer-term interests. The reactive person says, "What feels good now?" The strategic person says, "What gets them what they want later?" Consider the difference between reacting and responding in a workplace conflict. The reactive approach involves immediate emotional expression, raised voices, defensive justifications, and attempts to prove the other person wrong through superior logic or moral positioning. This approach feels satisfying because it releases tension, but it accomplishes nothing strategic. The other person becomes defensive. Colleagues form negative judgments about your professionalism, and the original issue remains unresolved while new relationship damage has been created. The responsive approach involves a deliberate pause, a clarifying question, a calm acknowledgement of the concern, and a proposed next step that moves toward resolution rather than escalation. When your teenager breaks curfew and lies about where they were, the reactive parent launches into immediate consequences, lectures about trust, and emotional expressions of disappointment. This creates a defensive dynamic where the teenager focuses on avoiding punishment rather than understanding why their behavior was problematic. The responsive parent waits until morning, has a calm conversation about expectations and natural consequences, and focuses on rebuilding the relationship rather than winning the emotional battle. The teenager learns that manipulation tactics do not work because emotional appeals do not derail the parent's decision-making process. When someone challenges your idea in a meeting, the reactive approach involves immediate defense, evidence marshaling, and subtle attempts to undermine the challenger's credibility. This signals to everyone present that you can be rattled and that your ego is invested in being right rather than finding the best solution. The responsive approach involves acknowledging the challenge, asking clarifying questions about their concerns, and either incorporating useful feedback or calmly explaining why you believe your approach remains optimal. This demonstrates confidence, flexibility, and focus on outcomes rather than personal validation. The operational rule is simple. When you feel the urge to react immediately, pause for exactly 10 seconds before speaking. Count the seconds deliberately. Use this pause to ask yourself one question. What response serves my strategic interests rather than my emotional needs? Then speak from that strategic place rather than the emotional one. This 10-second protocol costs you nothing and saves you from countless self-inflicted defeats. Your objection to this approach is predictable. You believe that suppressing emotional reactions is inauthentic, that strategic thinking somehow makes you calculating or manipulative, that people think you do not care if you do not show immediate emotion. This objection reveals a core misunderstanding that keeps you trapped in reactive patterns. Strategic response is not emotional suppression. It is emotional intelligence applied to social situations. You are not hiding your feelings. You are choosing when, where, and how to express them for maximum effectiveness rather than immediate relief. My responses serve my goals, not my feelings. The next layer of ruthless calm involves understanding that most provocations are not actually about you. They are about the other person's need to discharge their own emotional tension or gain control over a situation they feel powerless in. When someone snaps at you in traffic, they are not responding to your driving. They are responding to their own frustration with their commute, their job, their relationship, or their general sense that life is not going according to their plans. When a coworker criticizes your project in a harsh tone, they are often dealing with their own insecurity about their performance or their fear that your success makes their contributions look less valuable. This understanding transforms your relationship to provocation entirely. Instead of taking attacks personally and responding defensively, you can see them as information about the other person's internal state and strategic position. The angry driver is revealing that their emotional regulation is poor and that they use aggression to cope with frustration. The critical coworker is showing you that they see your work as competitive rather than collaborative. The family member who pushes your buttons is demonstrating that they have learned to use emotional manipulation to get attention or change outcomes they do not like. Machiavelli understood this principle when he wrote in chapter 18 about the importance of appearing to have virtuous qualities while maintaining the flexibility to act according to circumstances rather than rigid moral rules. In practical terms, this means that your public persona should reflect calm competence and emotional stability, while your private decision-making process can be entirely pragmatic about what works and what does not. You do not need to feel calm to appear calm. You do not need to feel generous to act generously when generosity serves your purposes. You do not need to feel patient to behave patiently when patience gets you better results. The practice involves developing what you might call emotional theater, where your external expression serves your strategic goals rather than simply releasing your internal tension. When someone insults you publicly, your internal experience might include anger, hurt, or the desire to retaliate, but your external response can be a slight smile and a comment like, "I can see this is important to you." This response accomplishes several things simultaneously. It demonstrates that you cannot be easily provoked. It makes the other person's aggression look disproportionate, and it maintains your reputation for composure while giving you time to decide on a more strategic response later. When a family member tries to guilt you into changing a decision you have made, your internal experience might include frustration with their manipulation attempt and annoyance that they are not respecting your boundaries. But your external response can be a calm repetition of your position without additional justification or emotional investment in their approval. This teaches them that emotional manipulation does not work on you, while avoiding the relationship damage that comes from escalating the conflict. The operational rule for emotional theater is this: when someone attempts to provoke you, respond to their underlying need or concern rather than their emotional tone. If they are angry about a scheduling conflict, address the scheduling issue, not their anger. If they are frustrated with a decision you have made, acknowledge their concern without defending the decision or attacking their response. This approach de-escalates tension while keeping the focus on problem solving rather than emotion management. Your micro protocol for this week involves practicing emotional theater in low-stakes situations so that you develop the skill before you need it in high-stakes ones. When the barista gets your order wrong, practice responding with calm problem-solving rather than visible frustration. When someone cuts in line, practice internal observation of your emotional reaction without external expression. When a driver makes an aggressive move, practice seeing their behavior as information about their internal state rather than as a personal attack requiring response. My external response serves my internal goals. The objection you are forming right now is that this approach feels dishonest or manipulative, that authentic relationships require emotional transparency, that strategic thinking about human interactions somehow corrupts the purity of genuine connection. This objection misses the essential point. Emotional reactions are not more authentic than emotional responses. They are simply less useful. Your feelings are real and valid, but they do not need to determine your behavior in every situation. Strategic emotional expression actually enables more authentic relationships because it prevents the relationship damage that comes from reactive exchanges. Consider the difference between strategic and reactive approaches to relationship conflicts. The reactive approach involves immediate expression of hurt, anger, or frustration, followed by attempts to make the other person understand how their behavior affected you and demands for changed behavior. This creates a cycle where each person becomes defensive about their actions and focuses on justifying themselves rather than understanding the other person's experience. The strategic approach involves waiting until you can discuss the issue without emotional charge, focusing on specific behaviors rather than character attacks, and proposing solutions rather than just expressing dissatisfaction. The strategic approach produces better outcomes because it removes the emotional static that prevents clear communication. When you approach relationship conflicts from a place of calm clarity rather than reactive emotion, the other person can actually hear your concerns instead of just responding to your emotional tone. They become curious about your perspective rather than defensive about their behavior. They focus on problem solving rather than winning the emotional battle. Machiavelli wrote extensively in chapters 6 and 7 about the concept of virtù, which has been mistranslated as virtue, but actually means something more like strategic excellence or the ability to respond effectively to changing circumstances. Virtù involves making decisions based on what the situation requires rather than what your emotional impulses demand. In relationships, virtù means having difficult conversations when timing and context allow for productive dialogue rather than when your frustration reaches a boiling point. It means expressing appreciation when it will be most meaningful rather than when you happen to feel grateful. It means setting boundaries when you have the emotional resources to maintain them rather than when you're already overwhelmed. The development of relationship virtù requires you to become a student of timing, context, and emotional dynamics rather than simply reacting to whatever's happening in the moment. You learn to recognize when someone is stressed and therefore not receptive to feedback. You understand when someone is feeling insecure and therefore needs reassurance before they can hear criticism. You know when you are tired and therefore likely to escalate conflicts rather than resolve them. This understanding allows you to choose your battles strategically rather than fighting every battle reactively. When your partner makes a comment that normally would trigger defensiveness, you can assess whether this is the right time and place for that conversation, or whether it would be more effective to address the issue later when you're both in a better state for productive dialogue. When your boss gives you feedback in a way that feels harsh, you can decide whether to address their communication style immediately or to focus first on understanding and implementing the feedback itself. The operational rule is, when you notice emotional charge building in a relationship interaction, pause and ask yourself whether this is the optimal time and place for the conversation that wants to happen. If not, acknowledge the issue without escalating it and schedule a time when you can address it more effectively. When someone says something that hurts your feelings during a stressful workday, you might say, "I want to talk about that, but I think we would have a better conversation tomorrow morning." This prevents reactive damage while ensuring that important issues get addressed under better circumstances. Your practice protocol involves identifying the relationship patterns where you consistently react rather than respond, then developing specific scripts for those situations. If your mother always brings up your career choices in a critical way during family gatherings, prepare a calm response that acknowledges her concern without defending your choices or escalating the conflict. If your coworker tends to interrupt you during meetings, develop a technique for reclaiming the floor without creating hostile dynamics. If your teenager typically tests boundaries when they want something, recognize a pattern and respond to their actual request rather than their testing behavior. My timing determines my effectiveness. The resistance you feel to this approach comes from the belief that strategic relationship management somehow reduces the authenticity of your connections with others. This belief assumes that your immediate emotional reactions represent your true self more accurately than your considered responses do. In reality, your capacity for strategic thinking, emotional regulation, and contextual awareness represents a higher form of authenticity because it allows you to show up as the person you aspire to be rather than simply the person your emotional impulses make you in any given moment. Strategic calm becomes particularly powerful in professional contexts where emotional reactions can permanently damage your reputation and limit your opportunities. Every workplace contains people who are known for losing their temper, becoming defensive when criticized, or making decisions based on personal feelings rather than business logic. These people are systematically excluded from important decisions, sensitive projects, and leadership opportunities because their emotional unpredictability makes them risky to work with. The alternative is to become known as someone who can be trusted with difficult conversations, challenging feedback, and high-pressure situations because your responses are measured, professional, and focused on solutions rather than emotions. This reputation opens doors that remain closed to reactive people. You get invited to meetings where sensitive topics are discussed. You are included in strategic planning conversations. You are considered for roles that require emotional intelligence and social sophistication. The development of professional ruthless calm requires you to separate your ego from your work product and your personal feelings from your business relationships. When someone criticizes your project, they are not attacking you personally. They are trying to improve the outcome or protect themselves from potential problems. When your boss gives you feedback about your performance, they are not questioning your worth as a person. They are trying to help you succeed in your role. When a colleague disagrees with your proposal, they are not disrespecting you. They are advocating for what they believe is the best approach. This separation allows you to respond to professional challenges as problems to be solved rather than personal attacks to be defended against. When someone points out flaws in your work, you can thank them for catching issues you missed rather than becoming defensive about your competence. When your boss asks you to change your approach to a project, you can ask clarifying questions about their concerns rather than justifying your original plan. When a team member challenges your leadership decision, you can explore their perspective rather than asserting your authority. Consider the specific case of receiving public criticism during a meeting. The reactive approach involves immediate defense of your position, subtle attacks on the critic's credibility, and visible signs of frustration or hurt feelings. This response makes everyone in the room uncomfortable, damages your professional reputation, and fails to address the underlying concern that motivated the criticism. The strategic approach involves acknowledging the feedback, asking clarifying questions, and either incorporating the input or explaining your reasoning without defensiveness. This demonstrates confidence, flexibility, and focus on outcomes rather than ego protection. The operational protocol for professional criticism involves a specific sequence of responses that prevents reactive damage while gathering useful information. First, pause for exactly 3 seconds before responding. Second, thank the person for their input using their name. Third, ask one clarifying question about their specific concern. Fourth, either acknowledge the validity of their point or explain your reasoning in neutral language. Fifth, suggest a specific next step for addressing the issue. This protocol works regardless of whether the criticism is fair, well-intentioned, or delivered professionally. When someone says your presentation was confusing and unprofessional, your sequence would be, pause, thank you for that feedback, Sarah. What specific part was most confusing for you? Then either you are right, I should have explained that concept more clearly, or I structured it that way because of the time constraints, but I can see how that affected clarity. Then I will revise that section and send you the updated version by tomorrow. This response demonstrates professionalism regardless of how the criticism was delivered. Your weekly practice involves implementing this protocol in every professional interaction where you receive feedback, pushback, or criticism. Record your success rate in following the sequence rather than reacting emotionally. Notice the difference in outcomes when you use the protocol versus when you react immediately. Pay attention to how colleagues begin to treat you differently when they learn that you can handle feedback professionally rather than defensively. My professionalism is my competitive advantage. The objection that emerges here is usually about authenticity in professional relationships and the fear that strategic response makes you seem cold, calculating, or disconnected from your humanity. This concern reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about what professionalism actually means. Professionalism is not the absence of humanity. It is the application of emotional intelligence to workplace relationships. It is not about suppressing your feelings. It is about expressing them in ways that serve both your goals and your relationships rather than just providing immediate emotional relief. Professional authenticity involves being genuinely yourself while also being strategically effective. You can be warm, funny, creative, and passionate while still maintaining emotional discipline in challenging situations. You can have genuine friendships with colleagues while still responding to workplace conflicts strategically rather than reactively. You can care deeply about your work and your team while still separating your ego from your professional performance. The mastery of ruthless calm extends beyond individual interactions to encompass your entire approach to conflict resolution and negotiation. Machiavelli understood in Chapter 8 that severity, when it must be used, should be applied all at once rather than gradually, and that it should be measured, purposeful, and followed by benefits that help people forget the temporary harshness. In modern terms, this means that when you need to set firm boundaries or deliver difficult messages, you do so clearly and completely rather than gradually escalating through multiple confrontations. Consider the difference between strategic and reactive approaches to persistent boundary violations. The reactive approach involves multiple small confrontations, each one escalating slightly in emotional intensity, building resentment on both sides, while failing to resolve the underlying issue. The strategic approach involves one clear, calm, comprehensive conversation that establishes expectations, consequences, and timeline for change, followed by consistent enforcement without emotional drama. When a co-worker repeatedly interrupts you during meetings, the reactive approach involves increasingly annoyed responses in the moment, complaints to other colleagues, and eventual emotional confrontation that damages a relationship while potentially making you look difficult to work with. The strategic approach involves a private conversation where you address the pattern directly, explain how it affects your ability to contribute effectively, and establish a clear agreement about meeting dynamics going forward. The conversation might sound like this: I have noticed that we sometimes talk over each other during meetings, which makes it harder for both of us to communicate our ideas effectively. I would like to suggest that when one of us is presenting an idea, the other waits for a natural pause before responding. Does that work for you? This approach addresses the issue without attacking the person, focuses on mutual benefit rather than personal frustration, and establishes a clear behavioral agreement. When family members consistently violate your boundaries around topics you do not wish to discuss, the strategic approach involves one comprehensive conversation that establishes your position, explains your reasoning if appropriate, and clarifies what will happen if the boundaries continue to be ignored. Instead of repeatedly becoming upset each time the topic arises, you have one difficult conversation that prevents dozens of smaller conflicts. The operational principle is that one strategic confrontation prevents dozens of reactive ones. When you address pattern problems comprehensively rather than symptomatically, you solve the underlying issue rather than just managing its ongoing manifestations. This requires you to recognize patterns rather than just responding to individual incidents, and have difficult conversations proactively rather than waiting until your frustration forces you to react. Your implementation protocol involves identifying the 3 most persistent boundary violations in your current life, whether they occur at work, at home, or in social situations. For each pattern, schedule one comprehensive conversation within the next 2 weeks. Prepare for each conversation by writing down exactly what behavior you want to see change, what the impact has been, and what will happen if the pattern continues. Have the conversation when you are calm and the other person is receptive. Then follow through consistently with the consequences you established. My boundaries are clear and consistent. The resistance to this approach usually centers around fear of conflict and concern about damaging relationships. This fear keeps you trapped in cycles of small conflicts that cause more relationship damage over time than one clear conversation would. The family member who keeps bringing up topics you have asked them to avoid is not respecting your relationship boundaries. And your repeated upset responses are creating more tension than one firm conversation about expectations would cause. The strategic approach to boundary setting actually protects relationships because it prevents the slow erosion of respect and affection that comes from ongoing pattern conflicts. When people know exactly where your boundaries are and what happens when they cross them, they can choose to respect those boundaries and maintain good relationships with you. When your boundaries are unclear or inconsistently enforced, people accidentally violate them and then feel confused or resentful about your emotional responses. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 19 about the importance of avoiding hatred while maintaining authority, noting that a leader can be feared without being hated as long as they are consistent, fair, and focused on the common good rather than personal benefit. In personal relationships, this principle translates to maintaining your boundaries without making others feel attacked, diminished, or manipulated. You can be firm about what you will and will not accept while still treating others with respect and consideration. This balance requires you to separate the behavior from the person when setting boundaries. Instead of saying, "You always interrupt me and it shows that you do not respect my opinions," you say, "When I am interrupted, I lose my train of thought and cannot contribute effectively to our conversations." Instead of saying, "You never follow through on your commitments and I cannot trust you," you say, "When commitments are not met, it creates problems in my planning, so I need us to have reliable agreements." The distinction is crucial because behavior-focused boundaries setting addresses a specific issue without attacking the other person's character or creating defensive responses. Person-focused boundary setting triggers ego defense mechanisms that make people less likely to change their behavior and more likely to become resentful about the boundary itself. Your practice involves rewriting your current boundary conversations to focus on behavior and impact rather than character and judgment. Instead of thinking about what is wrong with people who violate your boundaries, think about what specific behaviors create problems for you and how those problems could be prevented. This shift in focus makes your boundary conversations more effective and less damaging to your relationships. The development of Ruthless calm requires you to understand the difference between emotional labor and emotional manipulation. Emotional labor involves managing your own emotions strategically to create better outcomes for everyone involved. Emotional manipulation involves using emotional displays to control other people's behavior or to avoid consequences for your own actions. When you choose to respond calmly to provocation rather than reacting emotionally, you are doing emotional labor that benefits both you and the other person. You maintain your strategic position while preventing the relationship damage that comes from reactive exchanges. When you fake an emotional response to get someone to change their behavior, you are using emotional manipulation that ultimately damages trust and creates unstable relationship dynamics. The distinction matters because emotional labor builds your capacity for leadership and influence, while emotional manipulation destroys your credibility and creates dependencies on deception. Emotional labor involves genuine emotional regulation in service of better outcomes. Emotional manipulation involves performing emotions you do not feel in order to control others. Strategic emotional expression, which is a component of emotional labor, involves choosing when, where, and how to express genuine emotions for maximum effectiveness. If you are genuinely concerned about a decision your team is making, strategic emotional expression might involve scheduling a private meeting with your manager to discuss your concerns rather than expressing anxiety during the team meeting itself. If you are genuinely appreciative of a colleague's help, strategic emotional expression might involve thanking them publicly during a meeting rather than just sending a private email. The operational rule is that strategic emotional expression amplifies genuine feelings rather than manufacturing false ones. You express real emotions in contexts where they will be most helpful rather than simply releasing them whenever they arise. This approach maintains your authenticity while increasing your effectiveness. Consider how strategic emotional expression works in parenting situations. When your child makes a poor choice, your genuine feelings might include disappointment, concern, and frustration. Reactive emotional expression involves immediately sharing all of these feelings with your child in the heat of the moment. Strategic emotional expression involves waiting until you can discuss the situation calmly, then expressing your concerns in a way that helps your child understand the impact of their choices rather than just making them feel bad. The strategic approach might sound like this. I felt worried when you did not call to let me know you would be late, because I care about your safety and I had no way to know if something had happened to you. In the future, I need you to text me if you're going to be more than 30 minutes late. This expresses genuine concern while focusing on problem solving rather than punishment. Your implementation involves practicing strategic emotional expression in low-stakes situations so that you develop the skill for high-stakes ones. When you feel grateful, experiment with expressing that gratitude in contexts where it will have maximum positive impact. When you feel concerned about something, practice expressing that concern in ways that invite problem-solving rather than defensiveness. When you feel excited about an opportunity, practice sharing that excitement in ways that build enthusiasm rather than just releasing your own energy. My emotional expression serves my relationships. The final layer of ruthless calm involves mastering what Machiavelli called the art of appearing to be what you need to be while maintaining the flexibility to act according to circumstances. In Chapter 18, he wrote that successful leaders must be able to use both the lion and the fox approaches, combining strength with cunning, directness with subtlety, depending on what each situation requires. In practical terms, this means developing a range of response styles that you can deploy strategically rather than always respond in the same way regardless of context. With some people, direct confrontation works best because they respect strength and clarity. With others, indirect influence is more effective because direct challenges trigger their defensive mechanisms. With some situations, immediate action is required, while others benefit from patient observation and delayed response. The mastery involves reading context accurately and matching your response style to what will be most effective rather than what feels most natural to you. If you are naturally direct, you must learn when indirectness serves your goals better. If you are naturally diplomatic, you must learn when directness is required for respect and clarity. If you are naturally patient, you must learn when speed is essential for maintaining momentum and opportunity. This contextual flexibility requires you to study the people and situations in your life systematically, rather than assuming that the same approach works everywhere. Your boss might respond well to detailed explanations and careful reasoning, while your teenager responds better to clear expectations with minimal justification. Your spouse might need emotional connection before practical problem solving, while your business partner needs practical solutions without emotional processing. The development of contextual mastery involves experimenting deliberately with different approaches and paying attention to results rather than just doing what feels comfortable. When your usual approach to a relationship problem is not working, try the opposite approach and see what happens. If you normally respond to workplace challenges with detailed analysis, try responding with summary action items. If you typically address family conflicts through emotional discussion, try focusing on behavioral agreements instead. Your 7-day challenge involves implementing one new response pattern each day in situations where your typical approach has not been producing the results you want. Day 1. Practice strategic silence in a situation where you would normally speak immediately. Day 2. Use the 10-second pause protocol before responding to any provocation. Day 3. Implement the professional criticism sequence in a work situation. Day 4. Have one comprehensive boundary conversation instead of multiple small confrontations. Day 5. Practice strategic emotional expression by choosing timing and context rather than just releasing feelings immediately. Day 6. Experiment with matching your communication style to what works for the other person rather than what feels natural to you. Day 7. Review your results and identify which new patterns you want to continue developing. The transformation that occurs when you master ruthless calm extends far beyond your immediate interactions to reshape your entire social and professional reality. People begin to treat you differently when they learn that you cannot be easily provoked, manipulated, or knocked off balance. They bring you their difficult problems because they trust your judgment and your emotional stability. They include you in sensitive conversations because they know you will not react dramatically to challenging information. They respect your boundaries because they understand that violating them has consistent consequences rather than just emotional displays. You become someone who can be trusted with power because you have demonstrated mastery over your own reactions. You become someone who can handle criticism because you separate your ego from your performance. You become someone who can navigate conflict effectively because you focus on solutions rather than emotional processing. You become someone who can influence others because your consistency and emotional discipline make your words carry weight. This reputation for emotional reliability becomes one of your most valuable professional and personal assets. In a world full of reactive people who can be predicted, manipulated, and destabilized through emotional triggers, the person who responds strategically rather than reactively has enormous advantages in every negotiation, every relationship, and every leadership opportunity that matters. The path from reactive existence to strategic response requires daily practice, consistent implementation, and patience with your own learning process. You will not master ruthless calm overnight, but you can begin implementing these approaches immediately and see results within days. Every situation where you choose response over reaction builds your capacity for the next situation. Every boundary conversation you handle strategically rather than emotionally increases your confidence and effectiveness in future boundary situations. Your old identity was built around the belief that immediate emotional expression equals authenticity, and that reactive responses demonstrate that you care deeply about outcomes. Your new identity recognizes that strategic response serves both your authenticity and your effectiveness better than reactive patterns do. You can care deeply while responding calmly. You can be genuine while being strategic. You can maintain your humanity while mastering your emotional reactions. The person you become through practicing ruthless calm is not cold, calculating, or disconnected from genuine human emotion. You are someone who has learned to channel emotional energy through strategic thought rather than immediate expression. You feel everything as deeply as before, but you respond in ways that serve your long-term goals and your important relationships rather than just providing immediate emotional relief. This transformation positions you to succeed in situations where reactive people consistently fail. You can negotiate effectively because you do not take offers personally. You can lead teams through difficult periods because you remain stable when others panic. You can maintain relationships through challenging times because you focus on solutions rather than blame. You can build the career and life you want because you have developed the emotional discipline that success requires. My calm is my power, my response is my choice, and my strategic thinking serves my highest goals.